So again, before I introduce the panel, I just wanted to take a couple of minutes to talk about the sort of the conception for tonight's event and why it is that we thought it was important to have this discussion at this particular time. Most recently, we'll all have known and seen the sort of public hysteria that's been whipped up, public hysteria on human smuggling that's been whipped up as a result of the arrival of the MV Sunsea, a ship carrying 492 Tamil refugees that docked on the west coast earlier this summer. And as a result, or in the context of that hysteria, we saw also some of the most regressive anti-migrant legislation in Canada in recent time. And of course, there's been a lot of that. I will let our speakers actually go into more detail about what some of that legislation looks like. But most sort of importantly, what Bill C-49, the most recent introduction of bills, which was called an Act to Prevent Human Smugglers from Abusing Canada's Immigration System, really called for a number of punitive measures. And a lot of people, luckily, opposed it vehemently, and I'm sure a lot of people in this room, people that are affiliated with different organizations and communities, but primarily the opposition sort of rallied around the idea that the bill punishes refugees and not smugglers. And in fact, like, both sides of the debate was sort of like replete with messaging around human smuggling having to be curbed, that it's sort of like a way for criminal organizations to exploit people, that it presents an abuse and an assault on Canada's otherwise generous immigration system, and so on and so forth, and that it prevents quote unquote real refugees from actually obtaining the assistance they need. So tonight, though, what we wanted to kind of talk about was what has been missing in those debates, what assumptions are carried within them, and what are the questions that have not been asked more publicly. So, like, what is smuggling to begin with? Who are the smugglers? Who has to rely on them and why? What is trafficking? Is there a difference between smuggling and trafficking? And how do Canada and other states sort of create and maintain the market for human smuggling and trafficking? And I guess more largely, before I pass it over, the broader questions are, on what basis does Canada itself have the authority to control people's movements across the border? A border that, of course, was like forcibly and violently imposed on Indigenous land to begin with. And in conjunction with that, too, where does the authority come from to sort of dole out different sets of rights according to how and when people arrived in Canada? So, without further ado, I'm going to introduce the panel. These are some of the questions that are, issues that are going to be raised. To start on my sort of far left, no pun intended, I guess, is McDonald Scott, who is an immigration consultant at Carranza Barristers and Solicitors, a member of the Immigration Legal Committee of the Law Union of Ontario, and a longtime organizer with Known as Legal Toronto and the Ontario Coalition Against Poverty. Next to him, we have Barbara Jackman, who is a lawyer specializing in immigration and refugee law. She has served as director in the Canadian Civil Liberties Association, the Working Women Community Centre, Intercede, and Defence for Children International. She's also argued a number of sort of precedent-setting immigration cases in Canada before various courts. Next to her, we have Professor Kamala Kempadu, who teaches in the Department of Social Science at York University and is the author of numerous publications, including Trafficking and Prostitution Reconsidered. And finally, last but not least, we have Graciela Flores Mendez, who is an anti-racist feminist, student, activist, and member of Known as Legal Toronto. She is a Mexican migrant who smuggled herself and lived without status in the United States near the US-Mexico border for the majority of her life. So thank you, everyone, for joining us and taking the time to speak tonight. I'm going to pass the mic over to